Who comes to mind when I describe a man who ruled by fear, bribed judges, and crushed anyone who stood in his path? You are probably picturing Al Capone or a mob boss. But what if I told you that wasn't who I was describing? I was talking about the men we celebrate as heroes. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, the original crime lords. Welcome to the uncomfortable truth. The Gilded Age wasn't a free market, it was a syndicate, a calculated system of control. These men didn't just follow the law, they bought it. They weaponized regulations to destroy their competition. Suit is just a new mask. One group used a Tommy gun, the other uses a ledger. But the goal is identical. Because the robber barons didn't disappear, they just evolved into the modern CEOs and the Wall Street we know today. In this video, we expose the Gilded Ledger. We will prove how organized crime became the blueprint for the American economy. If you suspect the game is rigged, you aren't crazy. You're just paying attention. Let's look at the proof. Stay with me.
Who comes to mind when I describe a man who ruled his territory with an iron fist? A man who didn't hesitate to bribe judges to look the other way, who hired private armies to physically crush anyone who stood in his path, and who forced smaller competitors to sell their businesses for pennies on the dollar under the threat of total ruin. You are probably picturing a dimly lit back room in 1920s Chicago, filled with cigar smoke and men in fedoras. You're likely thinking of Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, or perhaps a fictional Don like Vito Corleone. It makes sense. We have been trained to recognize these tactics as the signature moves of organized crime. We know what a racketeer looks like. We know what a gangster sounds like. But what if I told you that the description I just gave wasn't about a mob boss at all? What you are about to discover might completely shatter your perception of American history. I wasn't describing a crime lord. I was describing the men we celebrate in our history books as captains of industry. I was talking about men like John D. Rockefeller and Cornelius Vanderbilt. Welcome to the uncomfortable truth that Wall Street doesn't want you to see. We are often taught that the rise of the American economy was built on innovation, hard work, and the free market. But if you peel back the layers of the Gilded Age, you don't find a free market. You find a syndicate. The reality is that the line between a brilliant business strategy and a criminal racket is often just a matter of who is writing the laws. And in the late 19th century, these men weren't just following the law, they were buying it, rewriting it, and weaponizing it. Have you ever felt like the system is rigged against you? No matter how hard you work, the house always wins. You aren't crazy. You are just feeling the aftershocks of a system designed over a century ago. The robber barons, as they were later called, didn't just accumulate wealth, they created the blueprint for modern corporate dominance. They pioneered the hostile takeover before it had a name. They perfected the art of turf control, only they called it vertical integration. They understood that if you own the railroad, you own the oil, and if you own the oil, you own the world. The suit is the new mask. That is the core of what we need to discuss today. We tend to separate the criminal underworld from the financial world, but historically, they share the same DNA. The only difference is that one group uses a Tommy gun, and the other uses a ledger. One gets sent to Alcatraz, and the other gets a library named after them. But the methods, intimidation, espionage, price fixing, and the elimination of competition, are functionally identical. So, why does this matter to you right now? Because the Gilded Age never really ended. It just evolved. The strategies developed by these 19th century tycoons are taught in MBA programs today as the gold standard of success. When you look at the massive tech monopolies and financial giants of our current era, you are looking at the direct descendants of that original crime family model. Stay with me, because we aren't just going to bash rich people today. That's too easy. We are going to do something much more interesting. We are going to dissect the playbook. We are going to look at the specific mechanics of how these men laundered their reputations, how they turned crimes into regulations, and how they convinced the world that their greed was actually a virtue. The story we are about to unravel is called The Gilded Ledger. It is a story of how the organized crime model became the operating system for the American economy. But to understand how we got here, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to look at the moment when the Big Three decided that competing was for losers, and that the real money wasn't in playing the game, it was in owning the stadium. It's a heavy realization, isn't it? To look at the pillars of our economy and see the cracks in the foundation. If what I'm saying resonates with you, if you've ever suspected that the free market wasn't exactly free, I want you to take a brief second to like this video. It might seem like a small gesture to you, but it sends a massive signal to the algorithm that we need more content that challenges the official narrative and digs for the truth. And honestly, I want to hear from you. We are building a community here that values critical thinking, no matter how uncomfortable the history gets. So, tell me in the comments, do you think the system has changed, or have the players just gotten better at hiding? I read through your discussions, and your perspective is genuinely the fuel that keeps this channel running and helps us reach more minds. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to join us. We are about to peel back the curtain on centuries of financial history, and you won't want to miss the blueprints we're about to reveal. Because now that we know the game is rigged, we need to meet the men who wrote the rules. To understand the syndicate, we have to sit down at the table with the original dons of American capitalism. When we talk about organized crime, we usually talk about the 5 families of New York, but that is a distraction. The real syndicate, the one that actually reshaped the American landscape, was much smaller, much wealthier, and infinitely more dangerous. We need to look at the original Big Three. If this were a police lineup, you would have John D. Rockefeller standing in the center, flanked by Andrew Carnegie and J.P. Morgan. In the history books, they are listed as industrialists and financiers. But in the context of our investigation into the architecture of power, they are the dons. Each of them ran their own family, and each of them controlled a specific territory. But they shared a singular, ruthless mindset. Competition is a sin. To understand the transformation they forced upon the world, you have to realize that they didn't view business as a race to see who could make the best product. They viewed it as a war for territory, and in war, you don't play fair. You eliminate the enemy. This is where we uncover one of the most significant revelations of this entire story. They developed a weapon that economists today call vertical integration. It sounds boring, doesn't it? It sounds like something you'd skip over in a textbook. But that is the point. The boring terminology is the camouflage for the weapon. Vertical integration was not about efficiency, it was about the total strangulation of the market. Think about it like this. Imagine a baker who wants to sell the best bread in town. In a free market, he buys flour, bakes the bread, and sells it. But then, a don comes along. The don doesn't just want to sell bread. He buys the wheat fields. Then he buys the mills that grind the wheat. Then he buys the trucking company that delivers the flour. Finally, he buys the grocery store shelves. Now the local baker is trapped. He has to buy his flour from the don at a higher price, and he has to pay the don to ship it. The don controls the costs of his rival. This isn't competition. This is a siege. This was the hidden truth behind Rockefeller's Standard Oil. He didn't just drill for oil. He secretly bought the barrel companies and the pipelines. He even coerced the railroads into charging his competitors higher rates to transport their oil, while giving him a secret rebate, a kickback, on every barrel they shipped. He was essentially taxing his enemies to put them out of business. This level of control creates a profound impact on the psychology of the market. It sends a message: resistance is futile. Rockefeller famously offered his competitors a choice that feels ripped straight from a mob movie script. Sell to me now at a fair price, or go bankrupt, and I'll buy your scraps at auction. It wasn't a negotiation, it was extortion. And it worked. He didn't just win the game. He bought the stadium, the referees, and the concession stands. He understood that true power comes from owning the infrastructure that everyone else relies on to survive. Then you have J.P. Morgan. If Rockefeller was the muscle, Morgan was the bank. But not a normal bank. Morgan was the ultimate fixer. He didn't produce steel or oil, he produced order. His version of making an offer you can't refuse was called Morganization. He would take failing, warring companies, force them to merge, eliminate the competition between them, and create a monopoly that he controlled. He was the architect of the system we live in today. There is a specific moment in history that perfectly illustrates this Don status, a moment that is often painted as heroism, but looks suspiciously like a loan shark protecting his vig. In 1907, the US economy collapsed. There was no Federal Reserve, no safety net. The panic was spreading like a virus. So what happened? The government didn't step in, JP Morgan did. He summoned the leading bankers of New York to his private library. He locked the doors. He literally held them hostage in his study, playing solitaire while they sweated, until they agreed to put up the money to bail out the trust companies. He saved the economy, yes, but at what cost? He proved that he was more powerful than the United States government. He proved that the entire financial system relied on the nod of one man. Was that heroism? Or was it the ultimate power move to ensure that his own vast investments didn't evaporate? He wasn't saving the people. He was saving the casino because he owned the house. This journey into the past reveals the DNA of the modern corporate structure. The decisions these men made in smoke-filled rooms over a century ago are still dictating how you live your life today. They built a world where the free market is an illusion, a theater performance to keep the public happy while the real deals happen behind the scenes. They established the rule that if you get big enough, you don't have to follow the laws. You get to write them. It creates a feeling of helplessness for the average person, a sense that the deck is stacked. And that feeling is justified. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because owning the turf was only the first step. Once they had the control, they needed a way to enforce it against anyone brave enough, or foolish enough, to fight back. We need to look at the violence. And I don't mean metaphorical violence. I mean the kind that leaves scars. We need to talk about the private armies, the spies, and the literal wars that were fought to protect these ledgers. Because you can't maintain a monopoly with just a handshake. Sometimes, you need a weapon. If you are starting to see the pattern here, if you are realizing that the history of business is actually a history of conflict, I want to know. Drop a comment below and just write, I see the pattern. It tells me you're following the thread. When we peel back the layers of this story, we have to confront a brutal reality that most business biographies conveniently leave out. We've talked about the Dons and their control over the territory, but how did they actually enforce that control when a handshake wasn't enough? They didn't just use aggressive accounting. They used weapons. And I don't mean that metaphorically. The rise of American industry wasn't just a financial revolution. It was a series of violent turf wars that would make a modern cartel blush. This is where the gentleman's game facade completely crumbles, and we see the raw, unfiltered violence of the Gilded Age. We have to talk about the hitmen. In the late 19th century, if you were a tycoon facing resistance, maybe from workers demanding a living wage or a rival refusing to sell, you didn't call the police. You called the Pinkertons. Technically, they were a detective agency. In reality, they were a private paramilitary force, a mercenary army for hire that was larger than the standing United States Army at the time. They were the muscle. The most chilling example of this transformation from business to battlefield was the Homestead Strike of 1892. Andrew Carnegie, the man whose name is now on libraries and concert halls, wanted to crush the Union at his steel mill. But Carnegie was smart. He didn't want the blood on his hands. So he left the country, hiding out in a castle in Scotland, and left his ruthlessly efficient hatchet man, Henry Clay Frick, in charge. Frick built a literal fortress around the mill, with sniper towers and high fences. Then, he hired 300 Pinkerton agents. Under the cover of darkness, they arrived on barges via the river, armed with Winchester rifles. When they tried to land, a literal war broke out. Workers fought back. Dynamite was thrown. Oil was poured into the river and set on fire. By the end, people were dead. This wasn't a labor dispute. It was a military operation to protect a bottom line. It reveals a terrifying mindset. Profit was more valuable than human life. But the violence wasn't always physical. Sometimes it was financial, and it was just as devastating. Let's look at the Erie War, which plays out like a heist movie. You had Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore, trying to hostilely take over the Erie Railroad. He wanted a monopoly on New York transport. He started buying up every share of Erie stock he could find to gain a controlling interest. But on the other side, you had Jay Gould and Jim Fisk, two men who acted less like CEOs and more like grifters. As Vanderbilt bought the stock, Gould and Fisk sat in a basement office with a printing press, literally illegally printing new shares of stock as fast as the machine could run. They were watering the stock. Vanderbilt was buying air. He spent millions of dollars, billions in today's money, buying worthless paper. When Vanderbilt realized he was being conned, Gould and Fisk grabbed the cash, packed it into suitcases, and fled across the Hudson River to Jersey City under the cover of night, bribing police officers along the way to protect them. They set up a base in a hotel, guarded by thugs, and started bribing legislators in Albany to legalize the fake stock they had just printed. This is the hidden truth of how these fortunes were made. It wasn't about providing value. It was about extortion, fraud, and the sheer audacity to break the law because you knew you could buy the judge. This brings us to the weapon that is still sharp today: predatory pricing. This is the silent killer of competition. The robber barons perfected the art of losing money to make money. It works like this. You enter a new market where a smaller competitor is operating. You drop your prices so low that you are actually losing money on every sale. The customer loves it because it's cheap, but the competitor bleeds. They can't match your price without going bankrupt. Eventually, they die or sell to you for scraps. Once they are gone, you raise the prices back up to monopoly levels. You haven't competed, you've committed financial asphyxiation. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject because you might be thinking, well, that was the 1800s. We have laws against that now. Do we? Or has the weapon just become digital? Look at the modern tech landscape. The transformation of the economy has moved from railroads to algorithms, but the kill zone remains the same. When a startup begins to threaten a giant like Amazon or Google, what happens? Recall the story of Quidsi, the company that owned https www.google.com search q diapers.com. They were growing fast, moms loved them, unnoticed. Amazon approached them to buy the company. Quidsi said no. Suddenly, Amazon slashed the prices of diapers on their site by 30%. They created a bot that monitored https www.google.com search diapers com prices and automatically undercut them, no matter how low they went. Amazon was reportedly losing over $100 million a month in just the diaper category. They were bleeding money on purpose. The executives at Quidsi couldn't survive the siege. They were forced to sell to Amazon. Once the deal was done, Amazon quietly shut down the discounts and eventually killed the brand. It is the exact same tactic Rockefeller used, just with software instead of railroads. The journey from the Erie War to Silicon Valley is a straight line. The methodology hasn't changed, only the technology has. It forces us to ask a difficult question about the innovators we worship today. Are they truly geniuses? Or are they just the best students of the robber baron playbook? This revelation changes how you look at every sale and every acquisition in the news. It's not just business, it's a strategic maneuver to clear the board. If this connects the dots for you, if you are seeing the timeline clearly now, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and simply write, "The game is the same." It lets me know you're seeing through the illusion. But here is the thing about winning the game through brute force and financial strangulation. Eventually, the people start to notice. By the turn of the 20th century, the robber barons had a massive problem. They had all the money in the world, but they were the most hated men in America. They were depicted in cartoons as giant octopuses strangling the globe, or as fat gluttons sitting on bags of cash while children starved. The public anger was reaching a boiling point, and with anger comes the threat of real regulation, or worse, revolution. They realized that you can buy a judge and you can hire a private army, but you cannot shoot an entire population. They needed a new strategy. They didn't need a lawyer, they needed a storyteller. This brings us to the most brilliant, and perhaps the most cynical, maneuver in the history of capitalism: the Great Wash. This was the invention of modern public relations, or what we should honestly call reputation laundering. Just as they laundered money to hide its criminal origins, they realized they could launder their reputations to hide the criminal origins of their wealth. They discovered that if you give back just a tiny fraction of what you stole, the public will not only forgive you, they will worship you. It was a transformation of the public mindset that was just as engineered as their steel mills. Take John D. Rockefeller. For decades, he was the boogeyman. Then he hired Ivy Lee, a man considered the father of modern PR. Lee told Rockefeller to stop hiding in his estate and start acting like a grandfatherly figure. They staged photo ops where Rockefeller would walk around and give shiny new dimes to children. It was theater, a man worth billions, handing out 10 cents. But the newspapers ate it up. The truth hidden behind the dime was that it was a cheap prop to distract from the fact that his company was still ruthlessly crushing competitors. But the image stuck. The monster became the philanthropist. Then you have Andrew Carnegie. After the bloodbath at the Homestead strike where his mercenaries killed workers, his reputation was in tatters. So he wrote The Gospel of Wealth, arguing that the rich have a moral duty to give away their money. He started building libraries, thousands of them. It sounds noble, doesn't it? But look at the architecture of the decision. He slashed wages, broke unions, and forced men to work 12-hour shifts in dangerous conditions to accumulate the fortune. Then, he used that fortune to build libraries where those same workers could go to better themselves, if they ever had the time off work to visit them. It was a masterclass in rewriting the narrative. He bought his way into heaven with money he extracted from the hell he created on earth. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because if you think this was just a quirky historical trend, you are missing the massive impact it has on our world right now. This reputation laundering didn't stop. It became the standard operating procedure for the ultra-wealthy. Today, we don't call it the gospel of wealth. We call it philanthrocapitalism, or in the corporate world, ESG, environmental, social, and governance scores. The parallels are staggering. We watch modern tech billionaires build monopolies that crush small businesses, harvest our private data, and manipulate public discourse. They face massive antitrust lawsuits and public backlash. And what is their response? Do they change their business model? No. They announce a multi-billion-dollar foundation to cure diseases or solve climate change. They pledge to give away 99% of their wealth. And just like that, the conversation shifts. We stop talking about the monopoly and start talking about the generosity. But we have to look behind the curtain of these decisions. Is it truly charity, or is it a sophisticated form of control? When a billionaire puts their money into a private foundation, they get a massive tax write-off. That money, which would have gone to the government to be spent democratically, in theory, now sits in a pot controlled by the billionaire and their family. They get to decide how it's spent. They get to shape public policy, fund schools, and influence scientific research to fit their agenda, all while retaining the social status of a savior. It is the ultimate power move. You keep the power of the money, but you lose the stigma of the greed. And let's look at ESG scores. Major investment firms now rate companies on how good they are. It sounds amazing. But dig into the revelations coming out of this sector. A company can have terrible labor practices or a monopoly stranglehold on a market. But if they buy enough carbon credits or appoint the right board members, they get a high score. It's the modern version of Rockefeller's dime. It's a token gesture designed to keep the regulators away and the investors happy. It allows corporations to wear a mask of morality, while the machinery of profit continues to grind underneath. This creates a confusing reality for us. We want to celebrate the good deeds. We want to be happy about the libraries and the vaccines. But the journey to the truth requires us to ask, at what price? If the price of a library is the destruction of the working class, is it a gift or a bribe? If the price of a green initiative is a monopoly that no one can challenge, are we really saving the world or just handing it over to a new set of kings? The wash is effective because it plays on our desire for heroes. We want to believe that the people running the world are benevolent. But the history of the Gilded Ledger teaches us that benevolence is often just the final stage of the business plan. First, you conquer. Then, you consolidate. Finally, you sanitize. It is a cycle that has repeated for 150 years, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every time you see a billionaire on the cover of a magazine being praised for their charity, ask yourself, what are they trying to make us forget? If this perspective is shifting how you view these headlines, if you are starting to see the PR machine at work, I want you to leave a specific comment below. Just write, "I see the wash." It tells me that you aren't falling for the performance anymore. The men we have been discussing, Rockefeller, Morgan, Carnegie, eventually died. Time, it turns out, is the one commodity that even the greatest fortune cannot buy. But here is the terrifying genius of what they created. The structure they built didn't die with them. It mutated. It evolved into an entity that is functionally immortal, the modern corporation. If a mob boss dies, the family often crumbles into chaos and infighting. But if a CEO dies, the stock ticker doesn't even blink. The board appoints a new face, and the machine keeps grinding. The Gilded Ledger was no longer kept in a private safe. It became the operating system of the entire global economy. This shift represents the most dangerous transformation in the history of power because it separated the crime from the criminal. When we look at the legacy of the robber barons, we aren't just looking at old buildings or trust funds. We are looking at a legal system that has been slowly, methodically warped to protect capital at the expense of justice. In the days of the Wild West or the early mob, the criminals ran from the police. In the modern financial system, the criminals hire the police. This brings us to a concept that sounds technical but is actually the hidden truth of modern corruption: regulatory capture. This is the state where the agencies created to protect the public interest, the watchdogs, start acting in favor of the very industries they are supposed to regulate. It's not a conspiracy theory. It is a revolving door. You see it constantly in the financial news. A high-ranking official at a major bank steps down and takes a job as a top regulator at the government agency overseeing banks. They spend a few years writing the rules, ensuring they are filled with loopholes that only a massive institution could navigate. Then, they leave the government and go back to the bank, receiving a massive bonus for their public service. It is a closed loop. The fox isn't just guarding the henhouse. The fox built the henhouse, wrote the security manual, and holds the only set of keys. This creates a backstage reality where the game is decided before the opening whistle even blows. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the impact of this legacy goes beyond just unfair rules. It fundamentally changes the concept of justice itself. We have entered the era of the too big to jail doctrine. This is the ultimate victory of the robber baron mentality. In the world of organized crime, if you get caught running a racket, you go to prison. The RICO laws were designed specifically to take down the mob. But on Wall Street, the logic is inverted. If you steal a little, you are a criminal. If you steal enough, you are a systemic risk, and the government cannot afford to prosecute you. Think about the financial crisis of 2008. This was a clear case of massive systemic fraud. Banks were packaging toxic mortgages they knew were garbage, bribing ratings agencies to stamp them as AAA safe investments, and then selling them to pension funds and regular investors. When the house of cards collapsed, millions of people lost their homes. Retirement accounts were wiped out. The global economy was brought to its knees. And what happened to the architects of this disaster? Were there mass arrests? Did we see CEOs in handcuffs doing the perp walk like we see with street dealers? No. Instead, we saw the bailout. This is the most perverted legacy of the Gilded Age. In a true capitalist system, the one they claim to love, failure is supposed to be the punishment for bad decisions. If a local bakery is managed poorly, it goes out of business. But when these massive institutions failed due to their own greed and gambling, the government stepped in and filled their vaults with taxpayer money. They privatized the profits and socialized the losses. The executives who crashed the economy didn't just stay out of jail. Many of them paid themselves bonuses with the bailout money. It creates a mindset where there is literally no downside to risk. If you win, you keep the money. If you lose, the public pays the tab. This brings us to the emotional trigger that makes this story so infuriatingly personal. It is the double standard that stares us in the face every day. The justice system has become bifurcated. There is one set of laws for the citizens and another for the corporation. If a regular person, someone like you or me, walks into a convenience store and steals $1,000 from the register, they will be arrested, charged, and likely sent to jail. Their life will be ruined. The stigma of being a criminal will follow them forever. But if a bank launders billions of dollars for drug cartels, which has happened, documented in court, or if a pharmaceutical company knowingly pushes a product that kills thousands of people, what is the penalty? They pay a fine, they write a check. They don't admit guilt, they just settle. The fine is often just a fraction of the profit they made from the crime. It's treated as a business expense like paying the electric bill or buying paper clips. The decisions made in those boardrooms are calculated. If we break the law, we will make $10 billion. The fine will be $1 billion, net profit, $9 billion, let's do it. This is the journey we have been on, from the rough and tumble violence of the 19th century railroads to the sterile, air-conditioned corruption of the 21st century boardroom. The violence has been sanitized. They don't need Pinkertons to shoot strikers anymore. They have lobbyists to dismantle labor laws. They don't need to bribe a judge in a back alley. They can legally donate millions to a politician's super PAC. The Gilded Ledger is still being written, but the ink has dried and the rules are set. The realization that the game is rigged can be paralyzing, but it can also be empowering. It frees you from the illusion that if you just follow the rules, the system will take care of you. It forces you to look at the world with open eyes. The legacy of the robber barons is a warning from history that power never surrenders. If this double standard makes your blood boil, if you feel the weight of this injustice in your own life, I want you to leave a comment. Just write, "Justice is blind." It's a way for us to acknowledge the reality we are living in. So, where does this leave us? We have traveled a long way from the smoky backrooms of the 19th century to the high-frequency trading floors of today. We have stripped away the polish, the PR campaigns, and the philanthropic disguises to reveal the raw machinery underneath. And if you have been paying attention, a singular, unsettling realization should be setting in right now. The history books lied to you. They told you that the Gilded Age was a specific period in time, a chapter that ended when the trustbusters came in and cleaned up the town. They told you that the bad guys lost and that democracy tamed the beast of unbridled capitalism. But looking at the evidence, looking at the hidden truth of how our world actually functions, we have to admit that the Gilded Age never ended. It didn't disappear. It just got a fiber optic upgrade. The robber barons didn't go extinct like dinosaurs. They evolved. They shed their top hats and tails for hoodies and sneakers, or bespoke Italian suits. They traded railroads for server farms, and they traded oil pipelines for data streams. But the underlying architecture, the DNA of the system, remains exactly the same. The syndicate model of organized crime, where you control the turf, eliminate the competition, and by the law, proved to be so effective that it became the standard operating procedure for the global economy. The organized crime model didn't lose. It won so completely that we don't even call it crime anymore. We just call it business as usual. We are living in a gilded cage. It is a beautiful cage, filled with smartphones, streaming services, and the illusion of infinite choice. But make no mistake, the bars are still there. They are forged from debt, from dependency, and from a carefully engineered consumer culture that keeps us working in the modern equivalent of the steel mill, often a cubicle or a warehouse, just to keep the gears turning for the new generation of titans. The ledger is still rigged. The house still collects the vig on every transaction you make, every hour you work, and every dream you chase. The wealth gap today is actually wider than it was when Rockefeller was alive. The consolidation of power is more absolute. The capture of the government is more seamless. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this isn't just about history or economics. This is about you. It is about the transformation of your own mindset. Understanding this reality shouldn't make you depressed. It should make you dangerous. It should arm you with the clarity that most people will never have. The vast majority of the population is walking through life playing by a set of rules that were written to ensure they lose. They believe that if they work hard, keep their heads down, and wait for permission, they will be rewarded. But the robber barons taught us the brutal truth. Nobody gives you power. Nobody hands you freedom. You have to take it. You have to build it. The journey we have taken through the architecture of corruption reveals that waiting for the system to correct itself is a fool's errand. The system is performing exactly as it was designed to perform. It extracts value from the many and funnels it to the few. If you are waiting for a politician, a regulator, or a benevolent CEO to save you, you will be waiting forever. The lesson here is not to become a criminal. It is to understand the mechanics of leverage. It is to understand that in a world of predators, you cannot afford to be prey. You have to look at your own life, your own finances, and your own career with the cold, strategic eye of a J.P. Morgan. You have to ask yourself, where am I vulnerable? Who controls my supply lines? Who owns my debt? Am I building my own assets, or am I just a line item on someone else's ledger? This is the impact of the gilded ledger on your daily life. It forces you to stop being a passive observer and start being an active operator. You have to create your own vertical integration. Maybe that means diversifying your income so one boss can't starve you out. Maybe it means learning a skill that makes you impossible to replace. Maybe it means understanding the tax code so you stop leaking money to a government that spends it on bailouts for the rich. The game is rigged, yes, but knowing the game is rigged is the first step to beating it. You can't flip the table, but you can learn to count cards. The ultimate question isn't whether the game is fair. We know it isn't. The question is, knowing this, knowing that the crime is the model, how do you protect your empire? And yes, you have an empire. It might not be a railroad, but it is your family. It is your time. It is your sanity. It is your financial future. These are the territories you have to defend with the same ferocity that Carnegie defended his steel mills. You have to build your own walls, your own moats, and your own alliances. The revelations of the past are the blueprints for your survival in the future. We have pulled back the curtain on the backstage of the American dream, and what we found was a machine built on blood and bribes. But we also found a roadmap of power. We found the keys to how the world actually works. Now the decision is yours. You can go back to sleep, back to the fairy tale where everything is fair and just. Or you can wake up, take the red pill, and start playing the game for real. If you are ready to stop being a spectator and start being the architect of your own life, I want to see one final thing from you. Drop a comment below and simply write, I am the architect. It's a declaration that you are taking the power back. I appreciate you taking the time to walk through this history with me. It's not the version they teach in school, and it takes a certain kind of curiosity to sit through the uncomfortable parts. If you found value in this deep dive, if it gave you a clearer lens to look at the world, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We have a lot more ground to cover in the coming weeks, and I want to make sure you are in the loop for the next breakdown. Hitting that like button is a small gesture, but it helps this message cut through the noise and reach the people who actually need to hear it. And since you're still here, I want to know who is really paying attention. Leave a comment down below that says eyes wide open. It lets me know you stuck with the story all the way to the end. Now, understanding the past is powerful, but understanding how this machinery works today is critical for your next move. I have a video popping up on your screen right now that perfectly complements what we just discussed. It takes these concepts and applies them to the modern financial landscape in a way that might surprise you. Click right there, and let's keep this conversation going.